Doo-doo. 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 Dum 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 dum. 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 Uh-oh. Hey there! One of the most important pieces of equipment in my home brewery is the Grainfather G30. I bought the G30 back in 2015 and I brewed a lot of beers over the years using this well-designed piece of equipment. Now, the G30 was specifically designed to be used in a small area such as an apartment or a small home brewery such as mine, but I've visited larger breweries that have one, tucked in the corner for small pilot brews. And it's amazing how many of those breweries got started in a garage with the Grainfather G30. The G30 was designed to brew all grain recipes. However, I've used it to brew extract and partial all grain recipes too. You can also use the G30 for distilling water using a separate alembic dome and condenser. However, if you intend on distilling alcohol rather than water, I recommend that you check with your local, state, and federal laws first. In this video, I'll go through the different versions of the G30, what's been consistent and what's been upgraded, some modifications that I've made over the years, some recommendations based on lessons learned, and the current accessories offered by Grainfather. So, are you ready? Well, giddy up, cowboy. Now, over the years there have been three versions of the Grainfather G30. Version 1 is the introduction version, which is the one that I have. Version 2 of the G30 redesigned the original control unit from a mix of mechanical switches, push buttons, and a small LED display to a Bluetooth-enabled programmable control unit that can link up to an app on your mobile device. Version 3 introduced a newly designed grain basket with perforated sides and a newly designed lower perforated plate with rolled edges. Now, this upgrade eliminated the need for the upper plate and the telescoping overflow pipe. Version 3 also upgraded the reset of the thermal cutoff from a manual push button to an automatic reset switch. Nice. Now, back in 2015, the only electrical option for the G30 available in the United States was 110 volts. Currently, both the 110 and 220 volt options are available in the US. However, the 220 option may be phasing out in the US. If you get one of the remaining 220 volt options, you'll need a dedicated National Electric Manufacturers Association, NEMA, standard 615 or 620 receptacle installed by an electrician. Or you could use your clothes dryer receptacle in conjunction with an adapter available from AC Works on Amazon. Next up, we'll look at the equipment that stayed consistent on the G30. So, here's a list of items that have stayed consistent over the years on the G30. A thermal well at the bottom of the boiler for a thermometer probe, a magnetic powered pump connected to a discharge pipe, a discharge pipe with a dual ball valve and tap, a fitting at the top of the discharge pipe with an internal spring-loaded safety valve, a 1600 watt heating element, 110 volt power option, a stainless steel filter with a silicone cap and insert, a recirculation arm, a tempered glass lid with a hole in the middle for the recirculation arm hose or for the counterflow chiller output hose during the sanitation process, and a counterflow chiller which, even though the original unit was improved using more robust materials, its design and functionality have remained the same. Now, there's one item that has been replaced due to the upgrade of another piece of equipment, and that's the heating element control switch located on the lower side of the boiler. On version 1 of the G30, this switch selects either the 1600 watt setting of the heating element when it's in the normal position, or the 600 watt setting of the heating element when it's in the mash position. However, after Grainfather upgraded the basic controller to a Connect control box, the percentage of heat generated by the heating element was now electrically controlled by the control box instead of the heating element control switch. Consequently, when the control box is installed, the mash position on the heating element switch is no longer needed. Therefore, the switch always remains in the normal position. On version 3 of the G30, this power select switch was replaced to simply turn the heating element on and off. Next, let's look at the upgrades that are backward compatible on versions 1 and 2 of the G30. Now, Grainfather's done an excellent job of making sure that all of their upgrades are backward compatible for both versions 1 and 2 of the G30. For version 1 of the G30, the Connect control box can be easily installed without any modifications required. For versions 1 and 2, the rolled edged upper and lower plates can be installed without any modification to the existing drain basket and the telescoping overflow pipe assembly. The newly designed perforated drain basket and the lower perforated plate are also backward compatible and will replace the existing drain basket, the upper and lower plates, and the overflow pipe assembly on versions 1 and 2. In addition, the new thermal cutoff switch with auto reset, it's also backward compatible for versions 1 and 2. Nice. Next, I'll show you the modifications that I've installed on my G30. Now, over the years, I've made several mods and additions to the G30 to help make my brew day easier. One of the additions I made was to purchase a separate glass lid with a silicone knob for my boiler. The G30 glass lid develops hot condensation on the inside of the lid as the water is heating up and when bringing the wort up to boil. Consequently, the glass lid needs to be lifted and tilted to drain the hot condensation back into the boiler. Removing the glass lid that comes with the G30 requires either lifting the lid by its edges or lifting the lid by inserting 2 fingers into the hole. This requires using a towel or heat-insulated gloves to avoid getting burned by the steam and hot condensation. Therefore, I bought a 12-inch glass cover with a silicone knob on Amazon for around $13. It's much easier to just lift the glass lid by its heat-resistant silicone knob, tilt it to drain the condensation, and then set the lid aside. Next up, replacing the G30's discharge pipe shutoff valve. The G30 discharge pipe has a variable shutoff valve with a small red knob. This valve controls the flow of hot wort from the recirculation pump to either the recirculation arm or the counterflow chiller input hose. Controlling the flow of wort is accomplished by rotating the small red knob clockwise to fully open the valve or counterclockwise to fully close the valve. Rotating the small red knob in small increments will restrict or increase the flow of wort until the desired flow is reached. Now, the small red knob is metal. It's not insulated, so it gets very hot to the touch, which again requires using a towel or a pair of heat-insulated gloves to avoid burning your fingers and doing the hot dance. So, I replaced the G30 discharge pipe's ball valve with a 3/8-inch 304 stainless steel valve with a long insulated handle. This makes small adjustments to the flow of wort much easier and without doing the hot dance. Now, remember, the Grainfather was designed in New Zealand, therefore all male and female threads are British Standard Pipe, BSP, and not National Standard Pipe, NSP, which is what we use in the United States. You can get this valve with BSP threads on Amazon for about $18. The female side of the valve attaches to the discharge pipe, and the male side attaches to the safety valve. Next up, modifying the safety valve. Uh-oh. Now, as I stated earlier, the G30 has an internal spring-loaded safety valve located at the end of the discharge pipe. The purpose of the safety valve is to avoid shooting hot wort up into the air if the pump is accidentally activated when the control valve is open. This could make a mess on the ceiling and quite possibly result in severe burns from boiling wort. It's a great feature, however, the ball and spring inside the safety valve can sometimes get clogged. And if it gets clogged during brew day, this very hot safety valve may need to be removed to unclog it. And this will undoubtedly result in a flurry of new and unintelligible swear words. After this happened to me, I removed the ball and spring from the safety valve. However, I follow a checklist for every process that I perform in the home brewery, and I always have either the recirculation arm or the counterflow chiller input hose connected to the discharge pipe whenever I'm brewing. Now, I don't recommend this for everyone. You have to make up your own decision as to whether or not it's right for you. So, don't send me photos and try and blame me for your stained ceiling and your wife chasing you around the house with a frying pan, okay? All right, next up, modifying the discharge pipe so that you can see the level of wort inside the boiler. Now, the Grainfather G30 has various levels etched inside the inner wall of the boiler. During the sparge process, when the grain basket is up and in the drain position, it's very difficult to see the level markings to tell how much wort's inside the boiler. You can get a flashlight and try to maneuver it around the gap between the bottom of the grain basket and the inside of the boiler so that the light just catches the etched markings. However, there is another way to know what the level of wort is inside the boiler, and that is to install a sight glass or a sight hose in the discharge pipe. There's two things that I want to know: the level of wort inside the boiler during the sparge process and the level of wort inside the boiler after the boil is complete. For me, I only need to know what the level of wort is between 6 and 7 gallons, so I don't need to replace the whole discharge pipe. Using the etched markings visible on the outside of the boiler, I marked off a section of the discharge pipe between 5.5 and 7 gallons, and using a pipe cutting tool, I removed a section of the discharge pipe, including a 1/2 inch on both sides for the hose clamps. I deburred the edges, installed a piece of high-temp silicone tubing, and secured it with a couple of hose clamps. Now, taking out a section of the pipe will weaken the rigidity of the pipe, so I installed a threaded rod between the two discharge pipe brackets and secured the rod with lock nuts on both sides of the brackets. Lastly, I filled the boiler with water and I marked off various levels with different colored tie wraps. As a final note, the level of wort inside the discharge pipe won't rise unless the air in the discharge pipe can be displaced. Therefore, the discharge pipe valve must be in the open position. If the safety valve ball and spring are still installed, installation of the recirculation arm or the counterflow chiller input hose to the discharge pipe will allow the air to escape. Next up, I'll go through some recommendations for brew day. Don't touch that dial. Now here's a few recommendations for your brew day when using the Grainfather G30. If you still have the original upper and lower perforated plates, I highly recommend keeping an extra silicone seal on hand just in case one of the seals breaks or tears during installation, which could result in a premature end to your brew day. Another recommendation is to always provide counter torque support to the discharge pipe safety valve when screwing and unscrewing the counterflow chiller's cooler connection knob or the recirculation arm's connection knob. Otherwise, the upper bracket will twist under the load and it could break the spot weld attaching it to the boiler. If it does break, there's a repair kit available on the web. If you want to avoid the torque issue altogether, there's a cam lock conversion kit that you can find on the web which eliminates the connection knobs and the torque issue. Hey man, how can I easily pour grains into my grain basket? Well, I'm glad you finally asked. I find using a series of jumbo flip-top cereal containers is a great way to easily hold and pour the grains into the grain basket. They're also airtight and will keep your milled grains fresh before brew day. For hoppy recipes, I sometimes use a large reusable fine mesh bag. To keep the bag in place and off the heating element at the bottom of the boiler, I install a bag with a bungee cord around the top of the boiler, and I use the heavy overflow inlet attachment to weigh down the bottom of the bag during the boil. I also like using the ProMaker 1 gallon hop spider because it sits lower in the boiler. As a side note, there's also a nice accessory available from Grainfather, but I'll go into that later. So, you say you're tired of those pesky hoses attached to the Grainfather counterflow chiller? Well, son, check out my video on how I modified the Grainfather counterflow chiller to install quick disconnects. It's a crowd pleaser. Next up, some noteworthy accessories available from Grainfather for the G30. Now, there are several noteworthy accessories for the Grainfather G30. The insulated grain coat is a must-have for the 110 volt version of the G30 because it helps retain heat in the boiler, which allows the water and the wort to reach and maintain temperature. The insulated grain coat also provides protection against accidental burns from the outer surface of the hot boiler. And if you're in a small air-conditioned room like mine, it minimizes the dissipation of heat from the outer surface. As a side note, it looks good too. Now, as you know, the Kinect control box provides Bluetooth connectivity to an app on your mobile device. However, Bluetooth has a limited range, so to extend that range, Grainfather offers a Bluetooth Wi-Fi bridge called the G-Cast. I would have named it the G-Spot. But what do I know? Now, as you regulate the flow of wort going into the counterflow chiller, the Grainfather wortometer will use the G30 temperature probe to display the temperature of the wort coming out of the counterflow chiller using the digital display on the Kinect control box. It's also a less expensive option to the analog temperature readings on the Blickman through meter. Another nice accessory from Grainfather is the hop plate. The hop plate is a perforated false bottom that straddles over the existing filter on the bottom of the boiler. It provides a large filtering area to strain the hops during the transfer of wort to the counterflow chiller. It's a nice alternative to using a large fine mesh bag or a hop spider, and it's easier to clean. Now, if you're using version 1 or 2 of the G30 with the telescopic overflow pipe, the overflow filter from Grainfather will help keep out any stray grains from going down the overflow pipe during the recirculation process. Okay, let's wrap this puppy up. Just an expression. Well, that concludes my video on the Grainfather G30. If you have any comments or questions, let me know. Cheers.